Well, both Dan from New Guy's Garage and Thunderhead 289 responded to my last video about how Manifold Vacuum is the way to go for your vacuum advance. Thunderhead 289 commented on my Instagram and on my YouTube video explaining his idea of ignition timing and why ported vacuum advance is better, and Dan created a whole video doing the same thing. They were both very well thought out responses, but there's a couple problems with both of them, but we'll get to that in a minute. So my previous video, where I explained that manifold vacuum is the way to go for vacuum advance, it gained quite a bit of traction, and there's quite a lot of really good discussion in the comments. There are people that agree with me, and there's people that disagree with me. Really well thought out responses on why they agree, why they disagree, and brought up some things that I didn't think about. So to all of you that commented down in that video and started that discussion, thank you. Now, there were also some comments that were just plain rude and had no explanation, but decided to call me an idiot, or decided to call the guys I mentioned idiots. Now, I know a lot about automobiles, especially older ones, but I don't know everything. Same with the three guys I mentioned, Uncle Tony, Thunderhead 289, and Dan from New Guy's Garage. They all have a lot of knowledge. They know a lot of stuff. They probably don't know everything. But it's not okay to just be rude, especially without any sort of explanation, just saying, oh, you're wrong and you're dumb. That's not constructive. The other thing is, I didn't make that video to bash those other guys. I have great respect for all three of them, and I think that they know a lot. I just disagree with them on this one point. Now to these responses from Thunderhead 289 and Dan from New Guy's Garage. Let's look at Dan's video real quick. He does a really good explanation of basically the same things I explained. However, he did point out something that I will admit I was a little bit wrong on. So when I was talking about mixture density and how certain mixtures will burn slower and certain mixtures will burn faster, he instead called it cylinder fill. And he went into a short explanation of why one burns slower and one burns faster. I will admit, describing it as lean and rich is not quite accurate. What I probably should have described it as was a less dense mixture and a more dense mixture. That would have been a little more accurate. But the principle is the same, and I feel as though it still explains the whole reason why we have vacuum advance. And then, Dan, I'm sorry you kind of set yourself up for this one. He mentions this video by Andy at Unity Motorsports. Great video, by the way, about tuning your vacuum advance. And he talks to the legend David Vizard. And Dan even regards him as a legend because the guy he wrote the book on a lot of this tuning stuff.
And Andy Wood, Unity Motorsports Garage, and David Vizard, the legend himself, have a video all about how to do that. Just showing you that that's kind of the way to do it. Look at their video for a more detail-oriented explanation. I don't want to steal it from them. Go watch their stuff.
But Dan, did you not watch the video all the way? Because at a certain point in the video, David Vizard says this.
Andy, ported vacuum versus manifold vacuum.
Okay, that's one of my favorite topics. Right. That's one of the biggest arguments on the world.
Let's clear all the bullshit here. Right? Ported vacuum only exists because of emission regulations.
Bingo.
Right? Every engine these days, hot rod engine, should have manifold vacuum.
Bingo.
And a really good distributor and ignition system which lights off the charge.
And one other side benefit that we haven't even touched on, when you have a high compression street engine, guess what? It wants to run hot, right? Well, when you have a vacuum advance hooked to manifold vacuum and you're giving it additional time, and guess what? It runs a lot cooler at idle. Yeah. It actually solved an overheating issue by having this on my truck. So just another point to have it.
So the legend agrees with me. Now, Thunderhead 289 initially commented on my Instagram post about the video, and we commented back and forth a little bit, and he described his reasoning for using ported vacuum and what he can do with his mechanical advance because he's using ported vacuum. On the surface, it makes some sense, but I still disagree at this point. Later, he commented on my YouTube video with another great explanation of his method, and is very well written. My only problem with it is right here. Thunderhead 289, engineer. Now, in our back and forth on Instagram, he had also mentioned that he was an engineer of sorts for his day job. Now, I did some research, and I confirmed that. He is, in fact, an engineer. However, in a field that has nothing to do with automobiles. Now, I used to be an engineer, and then I got promoted to an operations manager, and I was in charge of all the engineers. But none of that was in automobiles. It was in a different field. I could also mention that I was granted an honorary PhD for my contribution to higher education, or the fact that I'm ordained. But I've never mentioned any of this before. Why? Well, because it's irrelevant, honestly. Just because I am the Reverend Dr. Junkyard Necromancer does not mean I know more about ignition timing than anybody else. So, Thunderhead 289, I respect you for, having a really cool career. Seems like you do some really cool stuff. But what was the point of putting that at the end of your post? So people think you know what you're talking about more? But all that aside, they both had really good responses. You should check out Thunderhead 289's comment down below my previous video and read what he has to say. Also, go over to Dan's channel at New Guys Garage here on YouTube and go watch his video response. Also very well thought out. Well, what am I going to do about all this? Well, I'm going to do all the testing, and I am going to try and decide once and for all what is better. Hooking your vacuum advance canister to manifold vacuum or ported vacuum. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to take my daily driver F250. I'm going to tune it to manifold vacuum and do a bunch of testing I'll probably drive it for about a week that way. And then I will tune it to ported vacuum, drive it for a week that way, do some testing, and come out with some numbers and try to decide as scientifically and objectively as I possibly can with my limited resources, which is better. Now, before you start going down in the comments and start angrily typing, hear me out. I'm going to actually set up the distributor for each application and tune things accordingly. I'm not just going to unplug it from one vacuum source and plug it into a different vacuum source and leave the rest the same. In fact, I'm going to talk to Dan and Thunderhead 289, if he has time, to really understand their tuning methods so that I can represent it as fairly as I can and to give it the best chance that I can. And all of you that were whining in the last video about me not talking about mechanical advance enough and not talking about total ignition timing, the video was about vacuum advance and what it does and what its purpose is. It wasn't about ignition timing. But this next video will be about ignition timing overall and how everything affects each other. So here are the criteria I'm going to be looking at in the next video. Power, throttle response, idle smoothness, ease of starting, hot and cold, miles per gallon, exhaust temperature, engine temperature, and emissions. Some of these things are going to be really easy to quantify with just some gauges like engine temperature and exhaust temperature. I can just use a thermometer. Emissions, this one is going to be hard unless I can find a good deal on an exact exhaust gas analyzer, which I don't know if I will or not. So emissions, unfortunately, might have to go off the list. Power and throttle response, I've got to figure out a way to do that as objectively as possible because I don't know that I'm going to be able to have access to a dyno. I'm going to search around and see if I can, but I don't want to do any of this subjectively or seat of the pants, because that's where bias comes into play, and I want to be as unbiased as possible. So all of this, if you have anything that I should add to this list, put it down in the comments. Anything else that I should test for. And if you have any ideas on how I can objectively and scientifically test these things, also put that down in the comments. The goal is to find the best overall setup for a street-driven car. Not a drag strip car, not a race car. It can be a fast car, but one that you drive on the street normally. I want this test to be as objective as possible, and truly, if I am proven wrong, I will switch all of my vacuum advances to ported and tune for that. Because of all the testing involved, and because I want to drive the truck in each configuration for about a week, not to mention some of the other things that I still have to purchase for this, this video is going to take a few weeks, if not a month to a month and a half to complete. So stay tuned for that, keep an eye out. If you have any suggestions for this, again, put it down in the comments. And I'll have a couple other videos coming out unrelated in the meantime. So thanks for watching, and yeah, go check out those other guys that I mentioned too. Thunderhead 289, Uncle Tony's Garage, and Dan from New Guys Garage. Go check them out right now.